Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks for holding this hearing, the title of which is The Income and Wealth Inequality Crisis in America. And I think we ought to start with asking ourselves, is this really a crisis? Is that the way we should think about, especially the most recent trends in income and wealth inequality? I want to start with a chart that Mr. Reich has provided us. He refers to it as the wage and salary income has dropped as a percent of GDP. And this is the chart he provides in his testimony. And, you know, if you look at it, it does look like the trend, right? It was kind of pronounced since 2000. You could argue it goes back further. But, yeah, I mean, it looks like sure looks like it's declining. But what's really interesting is that Mr. Reich chose not to provide all the data that's available. He cuts off the data in 2018. The data for 2019 and 2020 are available. And so let's take a look at what the picture looks like if you include all the available data. If you include all the available data, what you notice is it's the same graph, except we've got this very significant uptick. In fact, it's an upward trend from 2011, clearly an upward trend. In fact, in 2018 and 2019, the upward trend, now mind you, what we're talking about here is wages and salaries as a percentage of our total economy. The upward trend that's been underway for 10 years now was accelerating in 2018, 2019, further in 2020. So should we consider that we're in a crisis of income inequality when the situation has been trending better for 10 years and most recently at an accelerating pace? Take a look. We've recaptured back where we were in 2003. I think when you've got more available, more data available, you really ought to use it. Let's take a look at another chart that we have here. This is from the Atlanta Fed. And it compares wage growth for the lowest 25% of wage earners to the wage growth of the highest 25% of earners. Now, the lowest 25% of earners is in blue, and the highest 25% of earners is in this gold color. And what does this chart show? It shows clearly that sometime around about 2014, wages started growing more rapidly for low-income workers than wages have been growing for high-income workers. And what does that mean? That means the income gap is getting narrower, right? If higher-income people's raises are occurring at a lower pace than low-income raises, then the income differential is narrowing. And that's exactly what's happening. And once again, not only is that happening, but it's happening at an accelerating pace because you see the gap by which low-income earners are outperforming high-income earners in terms of their wage growth, that gap has widened. So again, does an acceleration at the rate at which lower-income earners are gaining ground relative to high-income workers, when that's happening and accelerating, should we think of that as a crisis? Really? And the reason I'm concerned, well, let's go to one more chart here. We've got another one. It's provided by the St. Louis Fed, and it's from the data itself comes from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, and this is a depiction of average hourly earnings of production and non-supervisory employees. So these are not managers, they're not executives, and what's happening is wages have been rising, and you know, prior to 2015, not at a very spectacular pace, that's for sure, but it's certainly been accelerating to the point where in recent years, these wage gains have been well above the rate of inflation. So my point is, this is very good news. I know some would like to suggest that we have a crisis so as to justify various socialistic policies and even more redistribution of wealth. But the fact is, the income gap has been narrowing, and it's been narrowing at an accelerating pace. A quick word about the wealth gap. You know, one of the ironies of this is a big source of the increase in the wealth gap has been the inflated value of financial assets. And why have financial assets gone up so much in value? Well, a big part of it, I think, is ultra easy money by the Federal Reserve. Our Democratic colleagues have long been huge advocates of ultra easy money by the Federal Reserve. Well, you should be careful what you wish for, because this is one of the consequences. But even here, there is good news. And the good news is that while investing in financial assets used to be the domain of just the wealthy, that is increasingly becoming an activity of middle income and even people of modest means. In 1989, fewer than 1/3 of American households owned stocks. In 2019, a majority, almost 53% of American households own stocks. This is going to help narrow the wealth gap, and I see I have consumed my time. Thank you for indulging me, Mr. Chairman.